Hello and welcome to a fabulous Thursday here on Crypto. Oh my God, I've got my hands on the White House crypto report. Let's just dive right in. Whoop-pow! All right, so we've got this really cool graphic. I will give them some credit, the White House and kind of a distributed node system over here, a network, if you will, with the headline Strengthening American Leadership in Digital Financial Technology. First and foremost, I just got to go right to the end because there's this extremely lolzy graphic. Some of you might recognize this as the genesis block of Bitcoin, which historically contained an anti-banking statement that the chancellor conducts second bailout of the banks or something. But instead of a Satoshi quote embedded in Bitcoin's first block, we instead get a quote by President Donald J. Trump. Last year, I promised to make America the Bitcoin superpower of the world and crypto capital of the planet, and we're taking historic action to deliver on that promise. So just LOL coming straight out of the gates. But what does this bill cover? And it's about 150 pages of yummy data. Well, we have a lot of just establishing the lexicon, right? The terminology, the taxonomy, and the digital asset ecosystem, the digital asset market structure, banking, stablecoins, countering illicit finance, taxation. So these are all pretty useful things. Honestly, I think taxation is still falling far from where it should be. I mean, we really do have to reconsider how we're taxing these assets. When you look at long-term holds, short-term holds in equity in companies and real businesses, I mean, they don't trade, with atomic swaps. They don't move like data and information does. So everything can be so much shorter term in crypto anyway. It makes a little less sense to me to say you need to hold an asset for a year because a year is just much longer in digital landscape. But there are some funny things. I mean, as we go through it, it's pretty straightforward. And we have a lot of very straightforward data. Now, one thing that does concern me a little bit is just the sheer product placement of where a lot of this information comes from. And sure, you have somebody like Consensus talking about systems architecture. Now, Consensus was backed by Joe Lubin, one of the co-founders of Ethereum, as an ecosystem or a company that develops Ethereum. Sure, great, technical partner to get this data from, but it kind of stretches farther than that as we go on and on and on. So here we have blockchain oracles, of course, with the Chainlink logo all over them. And yes, Chainlink is an oracle company, so it kind of makes sense. We have cross-chain using CCIP, which is Circle's protocol, and graphic prepared by Chainlinks. We do have this kind of comically long and just horizontal thing coming from Galaxy Digital. I think Galaxy is a good resource. I guess that actually diffuses my concerns a little bit because Mike Novogratz was very vocally anti-Trump. So if they're taking Galaxy's content, that is a pretty decent move. Now, you can clearly see market trends, everything's trending up, and the United States is respecting the fact that this market is in fact widening, or I should say deepening. And of course, we have lots of partners, Kraken, at least pulling from the US, but it continues to go on with a pretty solid and basic overview of major elements inside of crypto, right? Mining and staking, and of course, key infrastructure providers and tools. So a lot of this could be considered very 101. Now, something that cracks me up is we talk about the tokenization process. And realistically, I mean, this is a technical composition, right? Tokenizing an asset is really gaining a lot of that asset, putting it into a trusted custodian, and issuing a token on the other side. Now, there are many people that do this, but it just kind of cracks me up to see Ondo just blatantly on the front here, right? Ondo is a very specific company with a token that I think they're doing interesting work, but the token itself is very much a meme coin. When you deal with securitization of assets, I mean, you're not really generating anything new. You're securing something that exists and you're pumping out a digital analog. Now, that's kind of what Ondo does. And then they put a token on top of that, which was purely speculative and had nothing to do with the underlying business. That being said, they are expanding now that they've done it well. They've created capital and they're kind of using, I mean, I'll give them credit. They're using the bootstrapping mechanics of crypto to create a treasury that they are now using to acquire real businesses and build out this more institutional stack for offering securitized assets. It's just what cracks me up is you see Ondo here and then just like everything else, right? Graphic prepared by Ondo Finance. So I just kind of have to laugh a little bit at how shilly this whole thing is overall. Now, we continue to go down this landscape and really I think what gets interesting is when we start talking about the regulation. A lot of people are like, Graham, you're so focused on regulation because that is the era we are in. The technology and its growth has been mired by regulatory enforcement. So, as we can see, the straight out of the gate first bullet points here are ended the Biden era SEC's enforcement first approach and disproportionately targeted disfavored industries. Same here, ended regulation by enforcement, refocused on the division of enforcement on fraud and helping victims. This is how it should have always been. And of course, Trump is never one to miss, slamming Biden. But to be fair, Biden was directly responsible for this. His admin was very much targeting cryptocurrency founders at the point of distribution and creation of companies and really not doing anything to help fraud or victims. In fact, it was setting up the industry to aim itself more towards meme coins, meme assets, things that actually are increasing the capability of victimhood and frauds. It's kind of utterly insane how that happened. But, we rescinded the SAB 121, which I did talk about previously in its own episode. We have the crypto task force. We withdrew together with FINRA the unduly restricted joint staff statement on broker-dealer custody of digital assets. Anyway, a lot of this is actually setting up very positively for the development of technologies like decentralized finance and things of that nature. This is all pretty exciting. And of course, we're covering security tokens. We include non-security digital assets and how they relate to an investment contract. All of this is very relevant when you're launching a token at inception. It might not be something that people really think about often, that they want to think about often, but how are we treating these assets when they go from being a twinkle in our eye to being sold to private investors but not yet existing to finally making it to the public markets? Any properly decentralized network does need a distribution of holders, of network participants, and if they're going to participate in that network, they should rely on the token itself to pay for the network functionality. So all of this is extremely, extremely important. We have network tokens, LOL, we would just call those L1s or whatever you want. And of course, they have recommendations here, which is a nice way to nudge the regulators in the direction that we would like to see them go. And I'll just shorten this down by saying the recommended actions are kind of revolving around this safe harbor concept, right? That at issuance, there should be a period of time through which they can jump through very clear hoops or swim lanes, as I've been calling them, to establish a directionality towards decentralization. And if they achieve that decentralization, they get to move out of the securities landscape and into commodities. And what's very nice to see here is, again, guidance on how we should grow and make this regulation so that we can actually have a healthy and vibrant industry rather than what was previously seen, which was try to sue them to death at every single turn. Now, by the time we get to chapter 4, we have some very crucial elements as well, banking and digital assets. Let's recall that under Biden, not only was it the SEC going after people, but we did see the debanking of 2 banks for working with crypto-based companies or tokenization issuers. One of the biggest displays of this has actually been Custodia Bank by Caitlin Long, that's been trying to do things as buttoned up, as by the books as possible, and she has not been able to set up a Fed master account. So the Reserve Bank Master Account is a deposit account maintained by a bank or another type of depository institution at a regional reserve bank that provides a gateway to the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. This is how you truly get liquidity, is by plugging directly into the Fed itself. So this is a big path forward for any sort of new banks that are built from the ground up to touch crypto. But this was also a mechanism to really put up barriers and protections for the existing banks, which is a little less savory. But we are seeing a very deep and robust overlook at how we are looking at traditional banking systems interacting with digital finance. Of course, we did see that announcement from Coinbase and JP Morgan yesterday, so this relationship is already off and running. And of course, they are providing with an outline of how we should look at these assets and how those various assets, again, ranging from meme coins to digital securities, security tokens, to some sort of wrapped security. I don't know what we're really calling those yet, that maybe exist on chain, all the way to L1 assets and what they're calling network tokens. Now, it's useful to see this simplified because it did take a lot of discussion on that taxonomy just to understand how we're going to put in this flow. And of course, stablecoins being a big group that I accidentally overlooked. And of course, we need to deal with insurance on digital assets. That is extremely important if we're going to deal with a sort of 2008 style effect we need to know the risk and where it is placed. Now, ironically, the risk on stablecoins is a lot lower. So for funds, for US dollars, banks don't need a one-to-one reserve, right? That's the whole point about fractionalized lending and the rehypothecation and all that fun stuff that banks love to do. However, the stablecoin bill, the Genius Act, requires that they have a one-to-one backing. So while the stablecoins are sort of jipping over the end user on those yield-bearing capabilities of buying the T-bills and earning that, they're actually much safer for an individual to hold their savings in because of that required one-to-one backing. So this does actually get interesting when you're looking at which is a more secure dollar, right? Like a bank dollar, and you're not really getting much yield on those bank dollars, let's be honest, in your savings account and your checking account. Or do you want a one-to-one backed stablecoin because the risk is now going from a bank with that Federal Reserve master account onto an issuer, really a tech business that's issuing dollars, and they want to make sure that they truly have the same amount of dollars that they're issuing on chain. These are things that are not clearly understood quite yet, but will mature. And as they do, and as the younger generation grows up kind of naturally engaging with these things, I do think you will just see that stablecoin dominance increase, not just because of the fluidity. And we are getting plasma chain that will permit the movement of dollars across the world for free. They are going feeless. That's their major competing edge. But we might see that the risks are just better. What if a bank collapses and yet the stablecoin holders under that bank are the ones that get full redemption while everybody else has 250K at the limit? Who knows? But this is all kind of fascinating, and these are the deep things that we really need to come out looking at. And they look, very specifically how we should be dealing with insurance and the risk across the spectrum. Now, chapter 5 gets deep, right? Stablecoins and payments. This is the real disruptive sector. Obviously, Bitcoin was meant to replace the dollar. It said it was a peer-to-peer digital cash. I don't think we're gonna realize that quite yet. Maybe one of the L2s on top of Bitcoin does this, but stablecoins are looking really good. And of course, you have Circle, who's a publicly listed company, and Coinbase partnered with Circle, throwing their weight into the ring to try to secure stablecoins under their purview. It would be interesting to see a decentralized stablecoin so that we're not just relying on these issuers and these entities, but we are finding that, this is a big component as to what's going on. Payment systems need to know how they're going to be handling these things. And quite honestly, I went out to dinner with my father-in-law yesterday and he said, why aren't you using crypto? And I really do think it is just the endpoints. It is Apple Pay. It is Google Pay. If they allowed me to pay with USDC, USDT, I absolutely would be. There would be no reason for me to continue to use a credit card. Y'all know my feelings on credit cards. But here we have the process of minting stablecoins, how we can look at them, and we're setting up clarity because this is useful. I continue to see reports coming out of the Wall Street Journal and others that just completely misunderstand the concept behind these assets. A recent report came out discussing stablecoins having the volatility, but she was describing Bitcoin, and it was rather confusing because the stable in the name is the anti-volatility element. But growth in market capitalization of dollar-backed stablecoins, one thing that this report is doing is showing that stablecoins are an effective mechanism to maintain US dollar hegemony. I've talked about this a lot, and if we want to combat the yuan and the utilization of the dollar, we just need more dollar holders globally. So this does get interesting, and let's be real, this does facilitate banking the unbanked. To allow people in developing countries to hold the dollar is a game changer. To beyond that, use the dollar in a decentralized financial ecosystem that only cares if they have connection to the internet is an absolute game changer for all of humanity. And I can't understate that. As much as people look at the grift and the bullshit in crypto, the bleeding effect of just being accessible to developing nations, people, to creating a banking system where previously people had no access to this stuff, just because we find it interesting, right? Anyone can go on Aave and take out a loan. It's pretty fascinating. And then, of course, how do we solidify the stablecoin freeze and seize process, right? If we are going to really make this sort of, truth be told, it's a CBDC in many ways. They're issuing dollars and they're going to freeze them and observe them in the same exact way. But we are different. We are running this from a business. It will be regulated, and there needs to be a clear-cut process for how this gets handled. Now, of course, the recommendation is for faithfully and expeditiously implementing Genius. Hell yeah, boom, Genius is up. So that's all pretty successful and exciting there. And of course, stablecoin adoption converging with existing frameworks. There is a fully thought out way, but look at the current banking networks, right? This gets to be really fun. Sending partner, original bank, corresponding sending bank, Swift, corresponding bank, blah, blah, blah. Guys, they still print out all the papers sometimes and meet in a parking lot to swap the papers because of that T+2 settlement time. And then we come down to P2P, sending party, receiving party. Oh my God, it just makes so much sense. Let's not over convolute this stuff. And of course, countering illicit finance, we're actually moving into a world where this is a much easier mechanism for doing it. We can track the funds. And even if they successfully go through something like Tornado Cash or a Samurai wallet, we can Chainalysis has said that they can actually figure out mixers and mixer counterparties. Now, maybe it's that last in, first out approach, which we don't believe to be a viable method, but the reality is that things like Thorchain actually spit out the wallet address on the other side. So it's just a matter of how long do we want to continue to track them and where do they mess up in this process to get caught. My friends in the FBI call Bitcoin criminal futures. If you conduct an illicit activity on chain, it's going to stay with you throughout that chain. Just because you don't touch those funds for 10 years doesn't mean that when 10 years comes and you activate that account, the powers that be don't just get a pop-up that says, hey, this tracked wallet is now moving. Go get them. Now, one thing that's probably very important to note is the share of digital asset transaction volume associated with illicit activity from 21 to 24 is extremely small. We're topping out at 1%, right? And this is Chainalysis versus TRM Labs. Obviously quite the skew, so I would be interested in knowing the breakdown of how they're doing this. But either way, you're looking at such a small amount. Illicit activity still wants the dollar. The dollar reigns supreme for privacy, and that could be problematic, but it is what it is, and that's an interesting point to see noted here. Our friends in North Korea are quite called out. The DPRK has been particularly adept at stealing digital assets from market participants, illustrated with a theft of $1.5 billion from a digital asset firm in February 2025. They use complex social engineering schemes to compromise networks, and basically anytime you meet someone on the internet, just hand them a picture of Kim Jong-un, say, return this to me with a dick drawn on their face. I swear to God, it works every single time. So these sophisticated actors, they can be broken pretty easily, which is quite amazing. But in all fairness, they are sophisticated. They will pretend to be an employee. They will bake themselves deep into your infrastructure. There are a lot of ways that you can miss this and get exploited. Now, taxation, to me, this is huge. We are very confused on how we tax this. If we treat these things like securities, which I don't think a network token is, right? It's a commodity. It seems absurd to me that I should have to pay out some sort of cap gains for moving from Bitcoin to wrapped Bitcoin, for moving from Ethereum to wrapped Ethereum. They have to change their asset due to the way the technology is developed, but the underlying asset philosophically remains the same. When you get into the technology of it, no, it's not the same, but a Bitcoin is the same as a wrapped Bitcoin. A wrapped Bitcoin is a reflection of a Bitcoin. So when these things move that quickly, and sometimes you want to engage a DeFi infrastructure play where you're actually moving these assets, but realistically, you're returning to them at the same moment anyway. All of this is to say they are not the same as a company. They are not building with multi-year timelines, and a lot of these could be algorithmically based companies that want these assets to move, to shift, to switch at the speed of light, right? They are finance moving at the speed of information. So we need a way to treat sort of value when it is informationalized, digitized, if you will. I made up that word, but when it moves on these database systems, it is moving at a speed and a cadence that is completely unrealistic, that is completely new to the traditional finance rails. These are from olden times. When the stock market came up, this is pre-computer. So we didn't even think about networks being involved in this kind of ecosystem. And now you have assets that can pop in, pop out, atomic swaps, for example, that can supply their liquidity to something for the advantage of maybe yield, but do require a swap. And that swap, I'll be honest, I think the taxes are completely wonky. I think if we ever want this to be digital cash, we need that admission that under $600 is exempt from these taxable events, but it is all pretty wild when you get into the nitty-gritty of it. And it's just like, guys, I'd rather just pay my taxes based off my P&L at the end of the year, my profits and losses. So this is complicated, though. There is a lot of laws behind taxes. Here we have wash sales. Because wash sale rules apply to securities, they would not apply to digital assets that are not securities. So this gets to be interesting, right? Do you actually just dump all of your assets at a bottom? If you have an asset collapse and you have 1,000, let's call it XRP, do I sell my 1,000 XRP for maybe a capital loss or no capital gains, lock that into my taxes, and then just rebuy those same 1,000 immediately? That's basically what wash sales are. And this gets to all be pretty silly again when you're looking at maybe a settlement of T+2 where you could not do this in the traditional markets previously. Now, crypto lending, super glad to see that there. And this is all going to be useful for, again, the creme de la creme, which is is getting Bitcoin as the basis for a mortgage. I think that is just so secure for the savings of people that have their savings denominated in Bitcoin. They want to be able to live in a house. They want to afford a house. They've had all of this wealth that they couldn't use. I know multimillionaires in Bitcoin terms that could not get a mortgage because their capital was not considered legitimate. Of course, somewhere in here, we talk about quantum computing and the risks around that, but it does say that there is a board established in the government that is looking at post-quantum and that they've actually revealed their take on it in 2024. And that's a great concern to have, right? We have to look at how technology moves forward, especially in an AI world. Now, digital asset market structure, cool. We're starting to see policy responsibility where it should lie. This has been a big fight for a long time, and the CFTC and the SEC have been in sort of a push and pull for who gets custody over certain things. But either way, it's nice to see this laid out very simply, right? Anyway, we see Congress and the regulator coming up in certain places and Congress in others. So again, just delineating where responsibilities should be laid, and that's all great. So I would say if you're curious, you could Eli 5 this thing pretty well. It's actually quite a simple read. If you're already familiar with crypto, then a lot of it is you can just gloss over it. The entire first half is just setting up that taxonomy, just establishing what words we're using when we're discussing this kind of stuff. But it does get into some meatier things towards the end. And of course, we have cementing a U.S. leadership through the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve and the U.S. stockpile, which is consistent with the framework established by these executive orders. And it talks about the reserve. And it says the reserve will generally not be sold and will be maintained as a reserve asset of the United States to meet governmental objective in accordance. The stockpile will be capitalized by forfeited digital assets. In other words, assets owned by the U.S. government, forfeited, need to satisfy the statutory objectives, basically saying they can't be really owned by somebody else, right? And they will establish an office to deal with all of this stuff. So maybe we do get a reserve. Who knows? That's probably coming up. And of course, they sign off with this very lolsy homage to Bitcoin, in which it's actually an homage to Trumpster himself. But anyway, the report's out here. The link to it is in the sources here. It's a fine read. I didn't find it to be too boring. And if there's a really specific question, it's very easy to identify. With that being said, we're clearly moving forward into a new world. And of course, right as I wrap this all up, the SEC just came out with a massive announcement via a speech from Chair Jay Clayton. And it's pretty wild because let's recall the SEC's been like public enemy number one, but now it says American leadership in the digital finance revolution. And they call this Project Crypto. And just in a nutshell, jumping over here, Project Crypto's goals include establish clear rules for the distribution of crypto assets, creating legal ground for tokenized securities, protecting self-custody and digital wallet usage, offering more options for crypto asset storage and trading services, enabling super apps, enabling DeFi software that operates under SEC regulations, offering innovative exemptions, and much more. Not included here is also including US users on airdrops, adding that US users no longer have to go through VPNs, so IP restrictions, geofencing, get that the fuck out of here. Trading normal tokens, L1 assets next to security tokens on the same exchange. This probably includes some adjustment of accredited investor laws. This is so big, and oh my god, are they leaning in? So we are clearly looking at a whole new era for crypto in the United States. Shout out to the Trump government for it. If it's the Trump coin grift that we have to tolerate, it might just be worth it. So all extremely exciting stuff. May this bring in a boon to crypto development. If crypto development is the leader and crypto prices being the lagger, so be it. But it might be that we are no longer in this traditional 4-year market structure, especially now that there is a lot of room for these companies to develop and grow. If you're adding in a 3-year safe harbor, I mean, why should we see these assets really boom and bust in the same way that they have been? Now, on the flip side, it could be that the booms and busts actually increase because speculation is the real goal and that people want these tokens very early before these companies can lay down and cross that Rubicon of safe harbor. Hard to tell, but that does mean we will probably see 2 different asset classes, which is newly released tokens going through massive spikes and then kind of waning downwards and selling off over the course of the next 3 years until fundamentals are laid, until these networks really get a sense to mature. And then you're looking at value investing, right? Going to the floor of who has fully distributed tokens, who has clear economics of the participants involved, who's no longer relying on market makers and has distribution and liquidity across the networks, and maybe, who is actually decentralized decentralized and cross that Rubicon of proving decentralization from that safe harbor. And we will get the value investors that see good networks and want to buy them from the floor. And I think we will strongly go that way, both in stocks and in crypto. And we're seeing it with the pipe deals that are happening left and right, where crypto assets are now being wrapped as businesses that are tradable online. We're seeing stocks being wrapped and tradable on chain. And that loop will probably perpetuate itself until something blows up. But either way, we are seeing the merge right now happening more economically than technologically between the traditional markets and the digital markets. All these things will convene at one point. We will have them accessible via our meta lenses. We are seeing the rise of ASI. Apparently, Mark Zuckerberg has talked about it, and recently just OpenAI Sam Altman came out to discuss it. So there's a lot to be seen about how agents get involved in all of this as well as we automate our world. That being said, enjoy everybody. Have a great day. Stay safe. Don't lever up, and I will see you tomorrow.